He's best known for popularizing science in Urdu and writing diverse scientific topics, particularly evolution for general audiences. And he's also serving as the head admin of Science Ki Dunia, which is the largest Urdu science Facebook group with a global audience, including Urdu-speaking diasporas. And his efforts have significantly raised scientific awareness in recent years, making a notable impact on science communication. So we are very happy to have you here, sir. Welcome to the session. And yeah, over to you. We look forward to
Thank you very much. Thank you, ma'am, and thank you, Scientia, for inviting me for this talk. As ma'am said, I have been involved in Science Ki Dunia, which is a Facebook group catering to science communication in Urdu. And today we'll talk about, what I have learned over 10 years in terms of science communication in Pakistan, what are the challenges and what are the opportunities and how we can move forward. So without further ado, let me introduce myself first. My name is Qadeer Qureshi. I did master's in electrical engineering. I've been in computer chip design for almost like 40 years. And the question is, sometimes I ask, why do I do what I do in terms of science communication, right? So science is my passion. It's not my profession, but it's definitely my passion. We started Science Ki Dunia, which we affectionately called SKD, Science Ki Dunia, about 10 years ago. And the goal was to provide scientific information, reliable, right, authentic scientific information in Urdu for people in Pakistan and other countries where Urdu is spoken, and particularly targeting people and kids, generally students who are not proficient in English. So the membership is approaching 1 million, right? 10 lakh. And it is considered now, I think it's fair to say, it's considered as the most trustworthy source of information, scientific information in Urdu on social media. And so science communication does have a lot of unique challenges in Pakistan. So let me talk about some of them. To start with, I think it goes without saying, I think everyone can agree that we have a broken education system. We don't have a culture where, asking questions is encouraged, especially in elementary and middle classes, and also, in households. And so emphasis has been on rote memorization and not necessarily understanding, right? Even today, we feel some questions, Sir, ye cheez kaise yaad kare? And I have to remind them that you don't have to memorize things, you have to understand things, right? In general, we have a low literacy rate. The official literacy rate, I just checked yesterday, it is considered to be around 62%, which I think is an overstatement. But that literacy rate also is not really a functional literacy rate. That is simply one can read or write his name or something. The functional literacy rate is much lower, right? And then what is probably one of the most depressing statistics about Pakistan is that more than 30 million kids will never go to school, right? For a country which is surrounded by rising nations like China and India and even Bangladesh, coming up very fast, having 30 plus million kids who will never go to school is going to be a huge challenge for us in the future. So that was the literacy rate. But if we talk about scientific literacy rate, it is virtually zero, right? It's not even measured, I think. But I can say with some confidence, based on what we have seen so far, that scientific literacy rate in Pakistan is much lower in other nations. But I don't know that there are any numbers that we can actually look at. And then on top of that, there is a utter lack of reliable scientific information in Urdu, right? So on social media, there's a lot of information available about science, authentic information, but most of that is in English. but most of our people do not speak English, so they cannot take advantage. Especially people who are in underprivileged areas, right? Not in bigger cities where kids get, or at least kids from some section of a privileged section of the populace can go to English medium schools and they can read and write in English. But in general, large percentage of our population does not really speak English, so they cannot really take advantage of the information which is available on social media. And most scientific information which is available in Urdu is a very, very low quality, right? Sensationalism, hyperbole, exaggeration, is used, and conflating science with pseudoscience, peddling pseudoscientific information in the name of science, and making extraordinary claims about minor developments in science. That's common. So that really doesn't give kids a fair description of what science actually is. Then we do have this problem also talking about Urdu speaking population. Urdu really is a language which is particularly suited for literary and poetic expression, but it's not really suited for scientific exchange. So the vocabulary in Urdu is really very, very poor when it comes to science, right? Most scientific terminologies, I have looked at, come from, I went to Urdu medium school myself. I have, seen books about science in Urdu medium for Urdu medium kids. And most of the scientific terminology which is used in, when scientific text is written in Urdu, those terms are utterly unfamiliar to Urdu speaking people, or people who understand, read and write Urdu, because they are driven from Arabic, and they're very, very old Arabic, right? And so this is not something that our kids can intuitively understand, right? So now it's becoming a little bit more acceptable to use English terminology, and that's what we do on Science Ki Dunya also. But in general, explaining scientific concepts in Urdu becomes much harder when terminology is not there, right? And so then, each term that we use, we have to actually explain that. And sometimes, in flow of writing or speaking, if we forget to explain the term, and then, people don't understand what we are talking about. In general, there's an utter lack of interest in science in our culture, right? Our culture is still, authority based, right? Which means, such and such person said this, so it must be true. Science is explicitly based on data, not on authority, right? So, what Einstein said or Newton said is not important. What is important is what data shows, right? If data shows Newton is wrong, then Newton is wrong, no matter how big a scientist he is. That is, incompatible with our culture, where authority is considered, or information coming from authority is considered reliable. We sort of have this culture even today where asking questions is not encouraged since early childhood, right? Children have natural curiosity, and they ask a lot of questions. And when parents or teachers don't have answers to those questions, instead of saying, okay, I don't know the answer, but let's try to figure it out, they simply says, don't ask questions, or, why are you asking questions, mind your own business, what have you. But that kills the curiosity in natural curiosity in kids. And then that really develops or propagates the anti-science culture, where few people are interested in science. People are interested in technology, but in using technology, not trying to understand what technology is, which requires scientific thinking, right? All this results in a lack of critical thinking skills. Critical thinking skills flourish only in the culture where skepticism and questioning is allowed, right? Questioning everything, essentially. Since asking questions is discouraged, then children, obviously critical thinking skills are skills. Skills are developed by practicing. And when kids don't get to practice those critical thinking skills by asking questions, then they don't develop these skills. Now, along with that, um, most of our kids have poor communication skills also, and that exacerbates the problem even further. What I've seen in science academia, many people don't really know how to articulate a question. Sometimes there's question comes which is quite vague and not related to science, and we try to answer that question, and then there's another question, and finally the person says, "Well, sir, what I really wanted to ask is this." And then I tell them, "Well, if you knew what you really wanted to ask, then you should have asked that, upfront, right?" But this is not their fault. This is because they have never practiced good communication skills, because that's also a matter of practice and matter of being taught. Low interest in reading books. It's anybody's guess. What has happened to book reading. We still have this culture where people believe that reading books leads to madness, right? Zyada kitabein padhoge to pagal ho jaoge type of attitude, which comes from anti-intellectual, anti-intellectualism that is rampant in our society. And whatever book reading was, common maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago, even that is gone down the drain. And so we know book reading is pretty much an all-time low in Pakistan. So we just saw this news a couple of days ago. In Lahore, there was a book fair. There are only 35 books were sold, and 1,200 shawarma plates were sold. This is a stark reminder of where we are, right? Now, we need to keep in mind that part of why book reading is lower now is because of social media. So maybe some people are reading books on social media, but that is I'm being generous when I say that, right? So another problem, which is I think a very big problem, and we have tried very hard last 10 years and continue to try very hard to oppose that or curb that, is rampant pseudoscientific information. Because we don't have critical thinking skills, because we don't have basic scientific knowledge, our culture is overly receptive to pseudoscientific information, which clouds people's mind even further, right? If you want, in question and answer, we can talk about some examples of that. When I gave a couple of talks in Pakistan, one of the talk was about science versus pseudoscience, and that video is available on Black Hole's YouTube page. So I would encourage you to go look at that if you are more interested in a little bit more detailed discussion about science versus pseudoscience. But the problem is, once pseudoscientific information infects someone's mind, then accepting genuine science becomes that much more challenging. Now, in all of that, our media could have played a positive role. And I remember 20, 30 years ago, when there was only one TV channel, PTV, Pakistan Television, there used to be science programs, right? I remember Dr. Hudbhai used to have very, very informative, programs about science, where he interviewed, prominent scientists from Pakistan and talked about, basic concepts of science. Before that, there was another gentleman, Laik Ahmed, who used to do very good scientific programs on Pakistan TV. Now, I don't see any TV channel even giving lip service to science, right? What is even more depressing is there are multiple programs where there are astrologers, talking about what's going to happen and all that. And we know, I hope everyone agrees that astrology is the epitome of pseudoscience, where you talk about planets and position of planets against stars, or sun against stars, and then we predict based on that what is going to happen to you, to me, to country, to any cricket match or what have you. But the fact that so many people take this seriously is really depressing. Another thing which is, has been, a big problem, and it's actually quite depressing, is girls in general tend to have lower interest in science compared with boys. This is a very big issue, you know, especially for a country like Pakistan, where, the as we have discussed, formal education is in dire straits. The first um, teacher of any kid is that kid's mom, right? And so if girls are not educated in science, then there's less probability that, the future generation will be. So we really need to work very, very hard. And this is a message to all you guys who are, working on to be science communicators. Please, we need to all work very hard to push scientific literacy for girls. There's, we have an attitude of anti-intellectualism, right?
Yes.
Where highly qualified people, they are suspected, and usually there's there's a narrative that they are agents of some foreign government, or they have some agendas or what have you, which is a direct consequence of our non-scientific thinking, and all the other things that we have talked about. Now, we do have the issue of lack of resources, right? Pakistan is a poor country. Education has never been a priority for us, and so, especially for scientific education and scientific research, we need much higher level of funding to provide appropriate facilities in schools and colleges, and especially elementary and middle schools. And then we do have another big issue, which is, our teachers are not trained properly for teaching science, right? Teachers themselves have very poor understanding of scientific concepts, and there's this notion of, you have to just memorize things to pass exam. That has to change. Conspiracy theories, right? Again, all these issues that we have talked about result in, prevalence of conspiracy theories. So, uncultured minds usually very easily latch on to conspiracy theories, because they provide simpler, although non-realistic explanation, or quote unquote explanation of complex phenomena, right? I mean, life is complex, especially international events. They are, there are many different reasons for those, and it's harder for people to study what's really going on, and so people latch on to conspiracy theories because of that. And then there is this, I think, is the elephant in the room, right? There's a common perception that science leads to atheism, or science is opposed to religion, or religion and science are incompatible, right? There is, in not all, I mean, some religious scholars are very open-minded, and they encourage science, but there are very large number of religious scholars who scorn science. मैं तो साइंस को जूती के नोक पर रखता हूँ, is a very common refrain. There's also this tendency of less informed religious scholars, again, not all scholars, but I would say less informed religious scholars, to tell fantastic stories which are hard for kids to believe, and but because it is told in a religious context, right? But that leads to unscientific thinking, and the problem is because they are portrayed as religious in the religious context. No one asks questions, no one bothers to check whether even in religious context that story is authentic, whether it's true, whether historically it's true or not, right? I always tell people, as much as we should always validate any statement which is about science, we should have much higher standard of accepting anything which is related to religion, because If it doesn't come from authentic religious sources like Quran or Hadith, then we really should challenge the narrator and ask. But we don't have that culture of asking religious leaders. There's also common and justified misperception that science leads to atheism, which I don't know where that comes from, because most of the scientists are actually not atheists, but unfortunately some of the scientists who are atheists are very vocal, so maybe that is what gives the impression. And reality is that science has nothing to do with religion. It doesn't make any statement about religion. Religion is based on faith. Science is based on empirical evidence. So by nature, they are independent of each other. Okay, so then the question is, how do we address these issues? How do we address these challenges? So I have not really, classified these into different groups. So I'll just talk about, in my mind, how do we fix that? So the first thing that, this is for science communicators, right? We have to keep discussion strictly about science, and we should not include politics, religion, nationalism, or any other topic when we are discussing science, right? This is how we need to conduct ourselves and also coach others how to do this, right? People who mix science with religion. So there's the saying that, when you mix science with politics, what is left is politics, right? And what I say is, when you mix science with religion, what is left is neither science nor religion, because you change, you disfigure both of them when you do that. It's our job as communicators to make sure that only authentic, reliable information is shared. Whenever possible, we need to provide source of this information, right? When I write articles, mostly in Urdu, right, I always provide link of source or sources that I took this information from, right? And those links, when someone clicks on that, they will have other links for more detailed information. And that's very important, because we have to practice what we preach. We also need to do, this is something we do in Science Ki Dunya also. If you look at Science Ki Dunya, we have a section which is called Guides, where we have a whole bunch of information and also links to authentic information about science, right? So we need to help our kids by identifying and publishing a reliable source of scientific information, right? If kids know how to look for authentic information, half the problem is solved. We have to very vigorously debunk pseudoscientific claims, especially those that are, wrapped in sort of a religious narrative, right? The things like, we are behind others because of a conspiracy, because West has, this huge conspiracy, right? We are not behind because of any conspiracy. We are behind because of our own attitudes, because we have lost interest in science, and we have lost this urge to learn. Encourage discussion. Always encourage discussion, but in a civil decorum, civil manner, right? In Science Ki Dunya, we have very strict rule. No one calls anyone addresses anyone by tum or tu, right? It's always aap. So that decorum, and also we have to teach our kids how to, disagree without being disrespectful. When we are answering question, we really should try to discourage appeal to authority, right? We shouldn't really say, this is true because Einstein said that. No, this is not true because Einstein said that. This is true because data demonstrates this true, right? Einstein may have come up with the theory of relativity, but we consider that theory to be true, not because Einstein said that, but because data has validated that, right? So we have to highlight difference between expertise and authority. Einstein has, or had the expertise to talk about relativity, but that's different from being authority. He could still be wrong. And so he's not the authority, even though he's an expert, right? Even same thing with doctors. Doctors are experts, but they're not authority. Authority is data. There's a very common attitude on our media that when we are discussing scientific topics, they tend to give equal weight to scientific and non-scientific views. So, for example, they will invite a scientist and then they will invite some, nobody pseudo peddler of pseudoscience, and then there's a discussion. People get this impression that these both views have the same weighting. We have to, explicitly teach our kids that no, these two views are not comparable. One is science, which is fact-based, data-based. The other one is personal opinions without any data. There's also, because we come from a religious culture where, munazara is how, people who may have different religious views, they sort of discuss things. There is no munazara in science. And so, even if someone, and I get that invitation all the time, such and such is, claiming that theory of evolution is incorrect. So you need to have a, live discussion. No, theory of evolution is correct because there's data behind it, right? If someone claims theory of evolution is incorrect, it's not my job to go discuss it with him to convince him or her that theory of evolution is correct. If someone believes theory of evolution is incorrect, then they need to do research, write scientific papers, and publish them. You don't settle scientific issues by debating on social media. Because having these kind of munazaras does the same thing that I said in my last bullet point, that that gives the impression that these views are equivalent. They're not equivalent. One is based on science, the other one is based on anything but science, right? So even though we should never encourage munazara, but having questions, we should always encourage, right? Asking questions. There's a difference between asking questions about science and questioning science, right? We have to be cognizant of that difference. So we have to provide authentic information, right? Whenever we are writing, whenever we are, answering questions, we have to, whenever possible, we have to provide, references also, but also encourage self-study. That's another thing that we have seen, which is a very, very common, common practice, that kids ask questions, and when someone answers, that they ask more questions, and we tell them sometimes that maybe you should go study yourself, and then they say, "Sir, I don't have time to study this." Right? Well, I'm sorry, if you don't have time to study this, then you don't have a right to ask questions either. It's no one's responsibility, even though we are all science communicators, and we take, or at least I can speak of most of us, we take our job and our mission very, very seriously. But in the end, it's not my job to teach science to every kid. It is responsibility of every educated person to teach himself or herself. We are here to help them, but not to spoon feed them science, right? So we have to differentiate between communicating science and trying to spoon feed science. We should not make people habitual, make this habit of, always being spoon fed. We have to encourage self-study because there's no other way. Science is not learned by other people telling you what it is or is not. It's by us ourselves studying it and thinking about it. When we are discussing science, right, we have to be very careful about keeping discussion limited to established science. There is multi-billion-dollar industry of peddling fringe science, pseudoscience, at the pretext that this is science that is not somehow allowed by establishment. There's no such science which is not allowed by establishment. There's only pseudoscience which is not allowed by establishment, right? If there is some idea that is correct, but is not accepted by science, the correct way to do that is write papers about that. If the idea is correct, and if the data is unquestionable, then it will become established science, right? When Einstein came up with theory of relativity, there are hundreds of scientists who were opposed to him, and they wrote a book, 100 scientists, against theory of relativity, right? But in the end, theory of relativity prevailed. Why? Because data showed it's true. So fringe science does not need to be peddled on social media. It needs to be practiced and written scientific papers about. That's how fringe science, if it's correct, it becomes science. But there's a lot of pseudoscience which is peddled in the name of fringe science, and we have to be very, very careful about that. And our job is to educate our kids about how to differentiate between the two, right? There's also, I've already talked about that, right? Questioning science is different from asking questions about science, right? I can ask question about, how do we know theory of relativity is correct? That is different from, I believe theory of relativity is incorrect, right? That is questioning science. And questioning science is a very, 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 very big claim. And there's this notion that bigger the claim, the bigger the evidence should be, right? So without any evidence, if someone, especially someone who is not literate in science, right? It's one thing if Einstein comes and says, well, in some cases, Newtonian theory is incorrect. That's one thing. But if someone who has only middle school level of education comes back and says, theory of relativity is incorrect, that doesn't have any validity. So when we are communicating, we have to sort of drive this point home that you don't question science simply because, it doesn't sound right to you. Only people who are experts in science can question science. We can ask questions about science, why it is true, how do we know it's true, but not make blanket statements about whether that it's not true. And this is something we see all the time about, especially about theory of relativity, theory of evolution, because our gut feeling is, because of our cultural upbringing, about religious feelings, that it must be untrue. But just because we think something must be untrue doesn't make it untrue, right? It's only data that makes it untrue, or true for that matter. We also need to coach our audience that people who misrepresent science, we shouldn't assume that they are honest. Most of the time, not all the time, sometimes there is honest disagreement. They may be misinformed, but most of the time there's an ulterior motive. When we, and this is in particular true about medical science, when people question medical science, almost always you will find that they're selling something. And, people who peddle, for example, who conflate or who claim that quantum physics proves their, spiritual worldview or what have you, you will find out that they have multi-million-dollar businesses selling stuff that has nothing to do with science, but their narrative helps them sell. Again, this is not a blanket statement. Sometimes people have honest disagreements, but also we need to keep in mind that simply because someone is honest doesn't mean that he's also correct, right? He may be honestly misinformed. So honesty in of itself doesn't really tell us that someone is correct. Discourage sharing anything that's not trustworthy, right? If there's a claim and there's no clear articulation of where that information comes from, then by definition we should suspect that, no matter how small or how big the claim, right? Especially if it's too good to be true, then we should suspect that, right? If someone says, oh, eating vitamin K or something cures cancer, It's a very, very big claim, right? Because for one thing, it starts with a conspiracy theory that doctors and scientists know that there's a cure for cancer, but they are not letting it public. They're not making public because it will kill their practices. That's in itself is a conspiracy theory, right? But if it's such a big claim, then we should always suspect that unless there is a very, very strong evidence. And you will notice that when people make such statements, there's zero evidence. There's always, someone ate that and his cancer was cured. Well, that, for one thing, we have no way of verifying that is true or not. But in science, anecdote is not data, right? If 3 people or 5 people or even 100 people got cured by using something, that's not data. That's still anecdotes, right? It has to be double-blinded studies with many, many thousands, very large and random sample set before we know that data, especially in medical science, right? If something is sensational, it's probably being exaggerated, right? Serious claims, medical claims, they are never sensationalized. Okay, next point. Encourage people to see what scientific consensus is instead of relying on a single scientist's opinions. Again, scientific consensus means a majority of scientists agree on that. There is no requirement in science that 100% of scientists should agree on anything. If that's the case, if that were the case, then every theory would be invalid, right? You can find on social media, and these things happen on social media, right? Almost all the time. You can find on social media, there are people who object to theory of evolution, of course, right? That's the biggest one. But people who object to theory of relativity, people who object to quantum physics, people who object to mechanics, general mechanics, right? The classical mechanics. These are all crackpots, right? But just because they can write a paper that looks like a scientific paper does not make it a scientific paper. So we have to make sure that we understand that. Though, especially when people say such and such scientist claims that theory of evolution is incorrect, so that's why theory of evolution is incorrect. That's a logical fallacy, right? Overwhelming number of biologists, they agree that theory of evolution is the only scientific theory that explains variety of species, right? So just because one or two scientists don't subscribe to that theory, it doesn't make it invalid. It actually makes sense that sometimes scientists, for whatever reason, whether they're honestly in disagreement or whether it's because of their religious beliefs or because they have something to gain from opposing that is besides the point. But as long as there's consensus in science, as science communicators, we have to educate people that is the scientific consensus which is considered science, not people who disagree with consensus. Especially when it comes to evolution, we have to, when we are discussing evolution, we have to make sure that we don't fall into this trap of discussing evolution versus creationism, because this can get out of hand very, very quickly, right? We have to make sure that people understand that creationism is not science, no matter how valid it sounds to us because of our beliefs. But when we are discussing science, we have to be intellectually honest, and we have to tell people what science says, right? And in particular, if someone asserts that evolution leads to atheism, or evolution, or only atheists believe in evolution, we have to strictly never allow anyone to make that equivalence. These are not correct statements. One of the unfortunate facts is that our textbooks are horrendously out of date, very, very low quality, and sometimes they misrepresent science also, right? The problem is, most of the kids, they take contents of textbooks as article of faith, right? So this mindset has to change. No book is perfect. We have to teach kids no book is perfect. Books can be wrong, especially textbooks can be wrong. And we have to also work. I mean, this is our job as science communicators also, um, to work with authorities to see whether we can, clean up our books and have, better quality books. Never allow anyone to defend conspiracy theories, right? We all sort of know as science community, or at least we ought to know what conspiracy theories are. We need to call conspiracy theories as what they are, right? We have to forcefully debunk them. We have to sort of encourage skeptical approach in addressing problem, right? Whether science, just because you or myself or Dawkins or Einstein say something doesn't make it true, right? People have to be skeptical about what we say also. We have to be skeptical about what we read from other science communicators. In the end, anyone can make mistakes. And so we have to, coach our kids to be skeptical. We have to teach our kids that we have fallen way behind in science and technology. And this is not a conspiracy. This is a direct result of our own priorities and attitudes. The only way to bridge this gap is to study science, right? We do have this sense that last time I went to Pakistan, I saw that we have fallen behind, which is actually a very good realization, because, if you don't have that realization, then, there's no hope. So at least there's a hope that, we have this realization that we are falling behind, but we have to, sort of get out of this mindset of conspiracy theories and get on with actually, studying science. In particular, that's true about girls, right? As I've discussed before, if you look at Science Ki Dunya, I think about 85% of the IDs are male IDs. Now, whether they are males or females behind those IDs, and whether female IDs have male or female behind those IDs, I don't know. But at least at the face value, most of the members are male. And I think ideally we should have 50-50. So in particular, we have to target our science communication to girls, because they are the future moms, and that is where kids learn. They are going to be the first teachers of their kids. So we have to, as science communicators, we are playing a critical role in bringing scientific information to masses, but we have to also encourage teacher training. And that's something that I guess whenever we talk to policymakers, whenever we talk to politicians, we have to impress upon them that teachers are the backbone of our education system, and they're horrendously underprepared to teach science, right? So we have to bring teachers in the modern world and encourage them to have hands-on, simple hands-on experiments to class, right? And also, which is very, very important, always encourage two-way communication. Encourage kids to ask questions, because that's how they get excited, right? Have tours of at least in bigger cities now, I see that there are some science museums or museums that have at least one portion where there's science related information as well. Encouraged kids to teachers to take their kids to such places. I always encourage our members, whoever is a teacher in our Science Academy members, that they really should encourage the other teachers to become to subscribe to Science Ki Dunya, Science, Scientia, and other trustworthy science channels. Uh, and also remind kids about scientific heritage that Muslims had. Right? We have this notion that Muslims were leading science a few centuries ago, right? Almost like 1,000 years ago. Most of the time this is used in a negative sense where we say, well, they stole us and they stole our technology, what have you. But we can turn it around and we can channel as a positive energy. Hey, we did that before, there's no reason we can do that again, right? So we can turn that around and make it as a positive things. So things are getting better, right? I see youngsters, they are interested in science. We are the youngest nation in the world, probably, and interest in science is rapidly increasing, which is popularity of Science Ki Dunya and other channels, Scientia also is a testament to that, right? There's also this realization that India and China, especially, they are way ahead of us, so we are falling behind. So these are kind of feelings that we can turn around and use as energy to energize science communication. Also, I've seen startup culture is building in Pakistan, right? And that momentum hopefully grows, and this will enable kids who are educated, who are literate in science and technology, to get more and more jobs, and they'll see job opportunities, and this will excite kids to science and technology. But we can also, as communicators, we can use that and leverage that to encourage more and more kids to adopt science, and in particular, new technologies like AI, right, computer programming, which is where the future is. And of course, social media, right? Although there's a lot of misinformation, there's also a very good tool of disseminating information. Uh, our government has utterly failed in encouraging interest in science, but private people, they are doing a lot. And I think that's where I think the hope is. And this time is right for us to work together and use technology to educate our kids, right? So this is my last foil. What I want to encourage all science communicators to work together. We have to, we have, different groups like Science Ki Dunya, there's Science Shia, there's, Takhti Online, there are, I'm sure other people who are doing this. We need to really pool our resources and, leverage each other's strength, and, because we all have the same goal, right? And we have to also, as I said earlier, there are more than 30 million kids who are not going to school, right? There are probably many, many more kids who are going to Urdu medium schools, government schools, where the level of science education is pathetic. But with media, with social media, with technology, we can very quickly build channels to push scientific information to disadvantaged kids, right? Building portals, games, apps to provide structured content, scientific content to kids, right? So we need to build, shorts, reels, small videos, right? All the things that kids today, like to do to engage them, instead of, I mean, I'm probably culprit there as well, because most of what I do is right, but I want to change that also. And in future, you'll see that, science could be we're doing more videos and things like that. But all of us, we need to be doing more of that, because that's where, the impact is. Very few people read these days. Our textbooks are pathetic. So I think one of the things that we all need to do, work together to augment material that, to build material that augments textbook, right? Um, you know, most of the kids, the only books they read are textbooks in their entire life, right? But textbooks are horrendously inefficient and insufficient to educate. So we have to build material which is like videos and what have you, but that augment the information that content of the textbooks. As I said earlier, I think we need to work together to impress it on authorities to improve our, textbooks and bring textbooks into 21st century instead of using just textbooks. Use mixed media where there are, electronic textbooks and there are videos embedded and all that, so kids can learn, when they are reading. And then uh, the way we are doing things today, we need to have more meetings with kids, with schools, with colleges, where kids can interact with us, the science communicators, and enable hand-on experiments and expert sessions where we can have uh, experts talk to kids and answer kids' questions. Well, that's all I have. Thanks for your time. I know that we had some hiccups, and so we had to change meetings. So, but in the end, hopefully, my message did get across. So, please feel free to ask questions.
Well, sir, thank you for such an amazing talk, and more importantly, uh, I also learned a lot of things, especially since you mentioned about the challenges, and from the end slide and last 15 to 20 minutes, as you addressed the uh, key steps, solutions which we could take,
Mhm.
summarizing them into point, how we could reach out to the kids, textbooks, and a lot of initiative for teachers and stuff. I think that was quite amazing. And now we can take up questions. Yes. Okay. So there is our first important question, sir. Uh, yeah, it is also important question that is social media design internet to accessible disadvantages class. Whom would you be trying to address? Okay, sir. The question is so on the, is the social media and internet are accessible to disadvantaged class? When we are talking about disadvantaged class, internet and social media is not accessible. Gopika asked, and whom we would be trying to address? उसके alternatively हम कैसे address करेंगे?
जी. So
When
I think मतलब again maybe I'm mistaken, लेकिन मेरा जो perception है कि जब हम disadvantaged class की बात करते हैं, तो we are not really talking about people who जिनके पास खुदा ना खास्ता खाने पीने को भी नहीं है. I mean I'm sure ऐसे लोग भी हैं, लेकिन I'm talking about the people जो कि you know जैसे पाकिस्तान में मैं देखता हूँ कि जो घरों में काम करने वाली ख्वातीन होती हैं, उनके पास भी सेल फोन है, उनके बच्चों के पास भी सेल फोन है, और ये ज्यादातर स्मार्टफोन होते हैं, राइट, जिन पे वो लोग वीडियो देख रहे होते हैं. तो प्रेमिस मेरा ये है कि ज्यादातर जो बच्चे हैं जिनको साइंस की एजुकेशन की जरूरत है, उनके पास स्मार्टफोन है, उनके पास because they have smartphone, they have internet access also. So we can actually address a lot. We can reach a lot of kids who don't have access to quality material. Did that
yes,
answer the question?
yes, you did. Another question.
Yes, thanks. Yeah. Thank you for the talk. It was interesting and I got many insights from it. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, Sir Qadeer, there are 2 to 3 participants, as I told you about, from India and Nepal. So Gopika is from India, and she did ask this previous question, and so that is good. That for this internship we also included 2 to 3 people. So we were trying to reach South Asia context. Uh,
Mhm.
so this is any other question, guys?
I have a question.
Yes, please, ma'am.
So I want to ask that actually I have been interacting with the Science Ki Dunia group for now, like more than 5 years.
Mhm.
And I have a two-part question. First, how did the idea for that group came to be? And what is like one insight or one or two insights and challenges that you can share about that group? Like how did you find it to be really useful for the people, and just some insights if you can share.
Well, so to be very honest, I did not start the group. The group was already established when I joined it, but it was in very, very early stage, right? There were only about, 2,500 members when I joined. And now, collectively, so we have two groups, right? Science Ki Duniya 1 and Science Ki Duniya 2. Collectively, there are more than 1 million members, and it's been 10 years, right? So I didn't start it, but the people who started it, the idea was always the same, that we need to provide a platform where kids can get reliable answers to their questions and get reliable content. So that was the premise, and I think that we have worked very diligently to make sure that that happens. Right, any information that is posted on Science Ki Dunya, we, the parts of the admins team, we feel responsible for that information. So we want to make sure that that information is correct. And it's always possible that by mistake we put something there, or some member share something which is not authentic. But as soon as we find out that something has been shared that is not authentic, we take it down. So that's been the goal. Anything that we put there has to be accurate, correct, scientifically. Um, the biggest insight, I think I've covered most of that in my talk, but if there's one thing that I have to pick, I would say that there is a huge interest in science in Pakistan, contrary to what we are told. There are kids, and I've seen that in my visit to Pakistan as well, but we see that on Science Ki Dunya on a daily basis. There's a big hunger of reliable scientific information, but the problem is social media, electronic media, print media, very few sources which provide reliable information, right? So most of the information people get who are curious, the information they get is not reliable. It is, pseudoscientific and all that. And I think that's where the challenge is. We need to find more and more ways of accessing those kids, reaching those kids, and providing reliable information to them.
Okay, sir. There is another question, sir, from a participant. Can you see on the question in the chat box, sir? I can read it, but if you could read out, that would be more easy for you. Chat box, sir. Otherwise, I can easily read.
No, I don't see that. Yeah,
okay,
I don't
sir.
see that. Yeah.
Let me read, sir. So, question is,
okay.
First of all, she thanked it was an impressive session. It is indeed an important talk for students in Pakistan. Question is, as you mentioned that the girls are less interested in science as compared to boys.
Mm-hmm.
What steps should a girl take to engage more in scientific world beside her course study?
Well, so as I said, I mean, there are for one thing, this is our job, right, as science communicators, to provide sources of reliable scientific information, right? And that's one thing that we do. As I said, on Science Ki Dunya, we have guides section where we have many chapters on different topics, and also we have links to other reliable channels, right? I mean, there's BBC Science, there is Scientific American, there's NASA, there's any reliable world-class university. They're going to be each department is going to have their own website with a huge amount of information. So there's no shortage of information, right? If we just take one advice, always go to reliable sources. And as I said, there are a handful that I just described. There are more, but at least we can start with BBC, right? There's NASA, there is universities, government agencies. Usually government agencies, at least in advanced countries, they don't put unreliable information on their website. So, but all MIT, Stanford, Harvard, all these big universities, there are huge amount of information. So there's no shortage of information. I mean, there's actually an overload of information, right? We have to be careful about what information sources we select. But if we select these handful, then I think we are good. But from our standpoint, we have to sort of encourage girls to study more science. I think that's where again, we have attitudes. This is, I think, everywhere in South Asia, but in Pakistan, it's a little bit more problematic. India is a little bit more, I think, open to education of girls than Pakistan is. But in general, the attitudes in South Asia, they are still pretty much the same. So it's our job to encourage girls to get more interest, to be more interested in science and take careers in science, right? That's where we need our countries to go, is more and more girls with careers in science.
Okay, sir. So there is another question from Gopika Krishnan. I also had another. Okay. Oftentimes science writers write about the most frontier research to let the public know about what is the newest development. The question is when science writers do get their news from the frontier research, very newly published stuff. What is the newest development and theories? Question is more, is it easy to decide whether the theory is correct or incorrect at the nascent stage? What would be your suggestion to such topic? The question is at the very recent stage when something is published and science writers have gone to write about it. What should be the take and stance early for science writers? Approach.
Well, so for one thing, yeah, as I said, most of their science writers, not all of them, but most of them, they sensationalize, right? So, there's a research. I mean, scientists do research, they publish papers. When science writers, the journalists, they read those papers, they probably get only 10% of what is actually being written, right? But then they sort of, color it with their own ideas, and then they, thoda mirch masala usme laga dete hain, right? They make it a little bit more spicy. That is where a science writer, publishes his or her article. That is then picked up by journalists, non-scientific journalists. They get only probably 1% of what that article says. And then they sort of, all bets are off at that time, because they then, present that as the biggest breakthrough in the history of mankind. Whereas if you read the actual article, it doesn't say that. And if you read the paper, it absolutely does not say that, right? It's just a scientific paper. So yes, we have to be very careful. As I said earlier, anything which is sensationalized, anything which is a breakthrough and all that, almost always is untrue, right? Most of this medical news, they are about paper where research was done in the lab on lab mice, and that's portrayed as biggest breakthrough in medicine. Well, I'm sorry, that has nothing to do with medicine as applied to human beings, because that experiment was done only on mice, and it takes decades before, even if that everything that is claimed in that research paper is correct, it takes decades before that approach is applied to human beings, and then drugs are designed, and then they are tried. There's 3-phase trials. In those trials, sometimes take more than a decade, and only then drug will be available. So anyone who says cure of cancer has been found, well, I'm sorry, that is not the case, right? So it's a real challenge, but I think as science communicators, it's our job to be honest with ourselves, not be sensationalists, and report things as they are. And when we read other reports, we also have to have that filter. Anything which is, any claim which is sensational, we have to sort of discount that. And then I assume that when people write these stories, at least they provide a link to the article. And we really have to have the discipline to go to the article. In that article, then, which is written by a science journalist somewhere, there'll be linked to the actual paper, right? And if we really want to be diligent, we have to go read that paper. Now, reading scientific paper is not easy, because that is not in everyday language. Scientific papers for every field, they have their own languages, their own terminology. So we have to sort of understand how that works. But basically, we have to do our due diligence before we write our stories. And that is not easy. It takes time, but that's, as science communicator, that is our responsibility.
Well, yes, reaching to the main source, that would be a very good approach. I totally agree. Sensationalism should be dropped down. And more importantly, there is another question from Hifzur Rahman. He has asked, do you think that science should be communicated through videos along with writing? He quotes that he has seen a lot of YouTube channels with good audiences, but lesser traffic with science websites. And question would be, as you have been working, Qadeer, you have been writing about it, you have been talking about it. So how do you compare both approaches?
Yes, yeah, I mean, this is something that I mentioned in my talk as well, right? These days, very few kids have the temperament and the patience to read long articles, and people tend to, especially kids, their attention span is,
Yes.
shrinking, so they tend to like videos. Now, the thing is, making scientific videos is challenging. It's not easy, right? Most of the videos which are made about science, they are a piece of junk. They have nothing, valuable to say about science. But yes, I think all of us, we really need to go to the next level, and we need to sort of spend more time making videos, but with the same level of intellectual honesty, that we have to keep. Our goal is to communicate science, and that is something that we should never compromise.
Okay, Richard, do you have any question? Okay, so uh, here is a question. Okay, so the question is, I wanted to ask most of the families in Pakistan that do not encourage their child to study science because no special output financially. Okay, even if we do MPhil, PhD in science subjects, there are many opportunities of earning, which is quite disappointment for parents and the society. What she means. How can we convince the parents and society in this situation to study for science comparatively to other subjects to go forward?
Well, so there are two things, right? One is studying science to understand how universe works. That is a layman's view of studying science, right? That is the goal that we should have all have in our science communication. But then there is studying science to become a scientist. That's a very different question, right? Um, I mean, part of me says that in the end, we really should follow our heart. And if we want to be scientists, we should then accept the fact that it's very difficult to be a scientist, especially in Pakistan. In India, it's easier, still challenging, but it's easier in India than in Pakistan. In Pakistan, is particularly challenging. Um, but having said that, you know, things are changing, right? As much as we always hear negative stories about Pakistan, I mean, the reality is that you know science and technology is rapidly growing, and if you look at number of scientific papers that Pakistan has generated, it is actually increasing very, very rapidly. So by the time someone who is in high school or in doing FSC, by the time that person does his MPhil or PhD, we're talking about 10 years or more. I think things will be a lot more receptive than today, but we shouldn't have any illusions that everyone is going to have a high-paying job just because someone has expertise in some technical field, right? That's unfortunate reality that there's economic side of equation as well. The demand is going to be whatever the demand is, 10 years from now. So we have to take that risk. But also, it's true that people who are highly, technical, there are other countries where those skills are in high demand also, right? So we can look at it from that perspective also. If someone is capable and someone has, highly technical education, then somewhere there will be a fit, but maybe not in Pakistan, unfortunately. So that's the risk that we take, right? But the other thing is, not everyone has to have PhD in science. We can have, uh, BSc followed by maybe even MSc, and still go to other technical fields like, software development, IT. In the other countries, a lot of PhDs are not working in their field, but they are working in financial, in, economy, making models for economy and all that. All basic sciences, when you go to that level, you study math, and math is a skill. I mean, maybe I should have mentioned that in my discussion. We in general, we have very poor view of mathematics, right? People are afraid of it. People don't understand why they are being force fed that mathematics. But reality is that the mathematics is the fundamental language in which science is done. So no matter which science you are doing, you have to have very good understanding of mathematics. But mathematics is also fundamental in modeling, and that modeling is not limited to science. There are other fields where modeling is done. And so, as I said, financial field, there are a lot of mathematicians working, there are a lot of scientists working, there are a lot of physicists, right? So there are other fields where, growth is going to come from as well. But if we focus to on those sciences that lead to, then study in AI, for example, that is where, it's not limited to advanced country, right? AI research can happen in any country, and that's maybe one thing that, our kids can look into, which requires a lot of math, but in the end, sky's the limit when it comes to AI, because AI is going to be applied in every field.
Okay, one more question is there. Since you have also discussed this a lot in your discussion, the question related to this. Some people forcefully mix science and religion together. They say that science is originated from religion, and they reject authentic scientific information, instead provide references of religious books as arguments. How do we address this?
Well, as I said, we have to be very, very clear about that science and religion should not mix. That has been, if you look at Science Ki Dunya, the first policy, first, when we talk about rules, right? The first rule is we do not discuss anything other than science. We don't discuss religion. We don't discuss politics. In particular, people who claim that science, came out of religion, they are wrong. It did not. It does not. Right? Anyone who claims that, all science can be found in some, sacred text, I always ask them, okay, tell me where I can find mass of electron or charge of electron in any religious book, right? It's a vague statement. It's based on emotion. It's not based on facts. Now, when we say science and religion should be separate, this in no way means disrespect of religion, right? I mean, religion has its own value. It's of course, we take that as article of faith, whatever, are the basic tenets of any religion. The followers of that religion take those as, articles of faith. There's no question asked. In science, everything is open to question, right? Again, that does not mean questioning science. That means asking questions about science, right? Questioning science requires that you are a scientist yourself, which means you need to have at least a PhD in a field before you have the requisite knowledge to then, question science. A person who has, metric or FSC level or FA level education, that person doesn't have the fundamental, knowledge base to question science. But having said that, religion, at least the basic tenets of religion, they are beyond question. You cannot question that, right? Fundamental tenets of science are all open to question. So that's a basic incompatibility that we have to realize. people who claim that religion and science are compatible. Well, it may be compatible in some fields. It definitely is incompatible in other fields. But that's besides the point. The fundamental nature of the two is different. One is based on faith. The other one is based on empirical evidence. And we need to keep them separate. Otherwise, as I said earlier, when you mix science and politics, what is left is just politics, not science. When we mix science and religion, what is left is neither science nor religion. People who sort of force them together, they distort religion also as much as they distort science, right? I can tell you honestly, I've written I have read many books about science and religion, written by religious scholars. None of them written by scientists. They're almost always written by religious scholars, and the scholars have horrendous grasp of science. They do not understand even the fundamentals of science, so they make gross misstatements about science, and that's true about even what we consider famous religious. I will not name names, but I can tell you that I've read many books, and none of them have done justice to science, and most of them don't even do justice to religion, because they distort religion to try to make religion appear to be compatible with what science is, right? But I don't even understand that attitude. Why should religion, confirm science, or why should science confirm religion when these are not, overlapping magisteria, so to speak? They are not overlapping.
I think the answer was really impeccable, and the person who questioned, he also said insightful session. So I think this was amazing, truly correlating with the both aspects of life, and it couldn't have been covered this well. Thank you, Sir Qadeer. You and the reviews are here. People are messages. Sadika is saying thank you. Gul is saying thank you. The participants have really enjoyed the talk. So that absolutely did matter more than everything. Another comment that came. So most importantly, the session was specifically curated for participants and us. So we did all have really had a great time. And
Thank you.
I will stay connected with you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir.